speaker at the tropical agriculture conference that we had in 2018 at the Nets. And he spoke at that time about building soil. Andre is the international director of Regeneration International, which is an organization that promotes food, farming and land use systems that regenerate and stabilize climate systems, the health of the planet and people. Regeneration International has over 350 partners in 70 countries and works with numerous agricultural systems such as agroecology, permaculture, ecological agriculture, holistic grazing, biological agriculture, organic agriculture, and agroforestry. And Andre is one of the experts in these fields. He spent over 45 years working and visiting countries and developing new crops all across Asia, Europe, North America, South America, and Africa, and of course in Australia where he lives. So it's no wonder that he knows so much about what's going on in other countries and the destructive effects of pesticides. As a matter of fact, my eyes were opened when I read his book called Myths of Safe Pesticides. He also wrote Poisoning Our Children. And besides all that, he has published extensively in magazines, newspapers, journals, conference proceedings, newsletters, websites, and like today, doing numerous media interviews for TV, radio, and online systems. Andre is the longest serving president of IFOAM, Organics International, the world change agent and umbrella body for the organic sector. IFOAM, Organics International, has around 850 member organizations in 127 countries. He is currently an IFOAM ambassador. He lectures and teaches at universities, institutions, and workshops around the world. He speaks at numerous conferences and seminars, as well as United Nations events on every continent. He meets with governments, United Nations bodies, industry, farmers, consumers, and NGOs on the multifunctional benefits of regenerative agriculture and on the science of increasing soil organic matter to both mitigate and adapt to climate change. So you see, we have an expert in our crowd and we can ask him just about any question. Andre and his wife, Julia, have an organic tropical fruit farm in Daintree in Australia, and he's 16 hours ahead of us, so it's Sunday morning for him. Welcome, Andre.
Thanks, Dottie. And yeah, what you can see in front of you is tomorrow, the future. So you'll know the sun comes up. And I really wish actually I could be with you in Baileys. This is the longest period in my life that I haven't been in an airplane. In some ways, it's been good. I've had more than a year, hardly, going from my farm. I don't think I've been more than 60 miles away from where I live, which is a big change. Anyway, look, what I wanted to really talk about today is how we can reduce pesticides based on, good science and proven practice. So, okay. Just being a bit slow. I just want to make sure that this is loaded up and everybody can see the title slide. Okay, thanks. So, what are other places doing to reduce pesticide use and what can Baileys do? So I want to start with the basics and the fundamental basics of how we do this. And why this is important is because this is forgotten in modern day agriculture. It's something you won't really hear about. But I always remember one day I had a field day on my farm and the guest presenter said, what is the most important thing we do when we farm? And I never forgot the answer, and that is we use leaves to collect solar energy for photosynthesis. And what's happening there is that solar energy takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and combines it with water, and it produces glucose, which is the most important molecule in the universe. And because glucose is the basis of the food system for most life. This is the chemical formula where plants use 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water, and then with solar energy, they combine it together. They make 1 molecule of glucose, and the byproduct is oxygen. And pretty well all the oxygen that we breathe that's in our atmosphere has come through billions of years of this process of photosynthesis. But when we look at a plant, so what you're seeing behind me, between 95 to 98% of that biomass comes from water and carbon dioxide using the energy from photosynthesis to make glucose. And this is really important because, farming these days forgets about the 95%. They've got the cart before the horse. Managing the 95% is crucial to the way we manage our farming systems. So let's dive deeper into this molecule. Glucose is the primary energy source for most living organisms, plants, animals, microorganisms. We've found a few exceptions, a very few. The bulk of us, every cell in our body uses glucose as our fuel. The glucose molecules can be modified into other sugars, such as sucrose, which is, sugarcane sugar, or fructose, fruit sugar, dextrose, lactose, milk sugar, maltose, malt sugar, and so on. O's is the scientific name for sugar. So that's why fructose is fruit sugar. Glucose molecules can also be combined together into long chains to form cellulose, which we know as wood or leaves or stems. But have a look at that word, O's, cellulose, means cell sugar. The coating on the outside of cells, of plant cells, is made from this special sugar. That's where plants, everything you see behind me in the way of plants, leaves, branches, it's all made from cellulose, which is long chains of glucose. They can also be combined together, glucose, to make carbohydrates. And this is the starches that we eat, bread, rice, wheat, potatoes, cassava, etc., made from glucose. It can be modified again. These carbohydrates can be changed again with the addition of adding hydrogen and become hydrocarbons, which are oils and fats. In fact, the whole of our economies run on fossilized hydrocarbons from plants, which came originally from glucose through solar energy. This molecule can be modified again if we add a bit of nitrogen, sometimes sulfur, and we make amino acids, which are the basis of our proteins, our DNA, hormones, everything comes from this one molecule. In fact, pretty well nearly all life on Earth is dependent on photosynthesis, directly or indirectly. There's only a few exceptions that we know that aren't. But all our animals and everything else get our sugars and starches and oils from plants or animals that have fed on plants. So I just want to say that photosynthesis to make glucose is the fundamental energy source and building block of life. Why is this important? Well, when we grow plants, around 30% of all these carbon compounds that are made, these living molecules of life that are made by plants, are secreted into the soil. And this is called, in some places the liquid carbon pathway, and other books it'll be called the carbon gift. The other picture you'll see there is a root tip. And what you can see is the exudates that come off the root tip as it grows. Plants put these out. Some of them are sugars to feed microorganisms. Others are compounds to lubricate the soil to make it easy for the root tip to get through. Other parts are, sheaths and buds. But about 30% of the photosynthesis products of a plant is shed by the roots into the soil. And this creates a place called the rhizosphere. And the majority of microbes on the planet live around plant roots. And its name is the rhizosphere. And it's the most biodiverse area of our planet. It has more life than anywhere else. A teaspoon of this soil has billions of organisms. It is so rich in life. And they are fed by the root exudates that you saw in that picture. And they have really important roles of releasing nutrients and protecting plants from diseases. And what they do is the roots and microbes release enzymes and acids and other compounds that dissolve the nutrients in the soil. Many of those nutrients in the soil are not available for plants. They're not in the right form. They need to be turned into the right forms, and the biology does it. They build deep soil structure, and deep roots build deep soils. This is a picture of what the rhizosphere looks like around a plant root. And you see where the arrows are, you can see these long threads. These are fungal mycelium. The threads are fungi. Where the stars are, you can actually see what's in there are other microbes. We call them endophytes, and they help with bringing in other nutrients. So one of the best known endophytes are things like the rhizobium bacteria we have in legumes like soybeans that fix nitrogen. So these have a range of roles of building soils, bringing nutrients such as phosphorus and nitrogen in, water, and also protecting their host plants from pests and diseases. This is an example here of just a small little pine tree, but you can actually see the fungal mycelium, how far it spreads out from. And if you measure all these threads, put them end to end, it's actually that they extend for kilometers and bring in essential nutrients like phosphorus, potassium, also water. They help drought-proof plants and protect against diseases. Essentially what they're doing is that these organisms can't photosynthesize. They can't make glucose. They need glucose. So they're doing a deal with the plants. I said, you give me glucose and I'll give you phosphorus. It's a trade, a mutual benefit that's going on here. So the key here is to basically feed them. The more feed that we can put into the system, the more of these beneficial microorganisms we get. This is the really important concept I want to get across here. If we maximize solar energy capture, in other words, the energy we're putting in, we do that by maximizing photosynthesis, and you maximize photosynthesis by maximizing leaf area. You know, one thing that it should be a no-brainer, but it's not in any standard agronomy book. You know, dead plants and dead soil don't photosynthesize. I think that's a really important thing to get across. Our systems about dead plants and sorry, not ours. I mean, standard agronomy is all about having dead plants and bare soils. What we want to do is turn around and say, no, we need live plants to get solar energy and make glucose, which is the most efficient way that we know to store solar energy to feed the system. The more that we put into the system, the more that we can produce out of that system. Energy in, energy out. It's pretty basic science. And we increase the energy by increasing the energy collectors, which are called leaves. So what I want to say here is that soils are actually created through the biological activity of microbes, the food web, the rhizosphere. They're mediated by roots, fed by leaves. And soil creation and the nutrients are primarily a biological process rather than a chemical or mechanical weathering process. This is something that standard agronomy has got wrong again. This is a biological process. That's how soils are created. And the greater amount of food that we can provide for the microbiome soil food web, the greater the soil and plant available nutrients. So plants correctly managed increase soil nutrient levels rather than depleting them. In the standard model, it's always seen that plants are always depleting them. That's why we've got to kill them as weeds. And that's why we've got to buy synthetic fertilizers to feed them. I want to turn this around and show it's the other way around. The more plants, the more fertility we can build. So let's talk about how we do it. And it's about management of plants and understanding, once again, basic biological sciences, starting with photosynthesis. So if this is a picture of a prairie grass, and what you can see here is that if you cut the leaves, the plant sheds its roots. The reason why is everybody thinks that plants feed from their roots. They get 5% of their feed from roots, which are the minerals, but 95% of what they feed from, what you see there, comes from water and carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. That's why I'll keep on saying this. 95% is critical for us to understand how we change farming. So when we cut the leaves of a plant now, it can no longer feed its roots. So if you have a look at what is happening here, the plant is going, and the plants aren't stupid. That if you cut all the leaves, and they can't feed their roots with the sugars. Don't forget, glucose is the basic energy source that we use for our cells. Without it, the cells in the roots die. So if they let every root die, the plant will die because it won't get water. So what it's got to do is balance itself and shed off the excess roots and just keep enough roots that it can feed to keep those roots alive, and then start growing, regenerating, getting more leaves, building more roots, more leaves. But this is what I want you to think. It's not, it's leaves first, roots second. Roots are important, don't get me wrong. That's where the water comes from, and that's where 5% of the nutrients come from, and that 5% is critical. But I find it astounding that we've neglected the 95%. which is the biomass. So knowing this, that by modifying leaf area, we can modify root area, we can use this in a whole range of ways in our farming systems. Have a look at the mass of the root area there, that when we cut the leaves off, all those roots are shed. The microbes will break that down and release all those nutrients into the soil. So when we cut tall grass, it's not just the material on the top that goes into the soil, it is the roots area. So in the case of this diagram, we start rethinking how we manage our crops. And this is where we introduce two concepts now. The cash crop. The cash crop is the one that we eat or we sell or we trade. And the cover crop is the one that we use to build soil fertility. And we can grow them together. And we should grow them together to maximize photosynthesis, to maximize leaf area, capture of sunlight. So in the case here, if you have a look at the taller plants are our cash crop, and the ones in between are the cover crop. The science here is we make sure our cash crop has access to the sunlight. By cutting the cover crop, or other people call it weeds. I don't like to use the word weed anymore. I'll call them cover crops, because if we manage things that are previously called weeds, they are now cover crops. And the worse the weed, the worse it grows, the more photosynthesis and the more soil fertility that we can build. In this case, if you have a look, its leaves are below our cash crop. So what it's getting is the sunlight that our cash crop isn't using. We're maximizing the capture of sunlight. Similarly, because we've cut it, it shed most of its roots. Its roots are not competing with our cash crop. So our cash crop's roots are deeper. They're getting the first, basically they're getting priority to get nutrients and water. And this is my farm, actually what it looks like at the moment at the end of our rainy season. And of course, my neighbors can't believe how I let my farm just get completely out of control instead of spraying it out and letting all these weeds just take over and ruin my farm. That's the way I'm seen here. I'm the crazy farmer. But let's talk about what we've talked about here. I put my tractor in there to show you the the guinea grasses and calopo and other legume vines. They're 10 feet tall there, taller than my tractor. And just imagine that now in terms of biomass of nutrients, and also imagine that what you see on top is the same underneath as roots. And while it grew, 30% also was, while it was growing, 30% of all that photosynthesis was actually put into the soil as exudates to feed the nutrients. This time of year now, I will either put my tractor through it, although what I prefer to do, that is really good cattle feed, stock feed, high nutrient, good fiber, beautiful stock feed, is graze it down. And then later on, put the tractor over it just to smooth it out. And so my place looks like this, will look like this in a couple of months' time in the dry season. And I think why this is very important is just to let everybody know that I'm in exactly the same climate as you are in Belize. It's just that I'm 6 months different, but I'm 16 degrees south of the equator. like pretty well. You guys are about 17, so we're north, and pretty well the same climate in every way. What you can see there is, what I want to show you is the topsoil I built. When I took over this farm, I had less than 1% organic matter, and I had a pH that was, highly acidic. This is a really poor soil. And in 11 years, I took it up to an average of 6. In some places, you can see I've got up to 9% organic matter. I've increased all my nutrients. Now, what's really important here is I didn't actually buy all these. So I did some. Most of this has come from the biology. Now, the other reason I wanted to show you this picture, if you look down, in the center of the picture, you'll see one large root going into the subsoil. That's what I had originally. If you look around the root, you can see the dark black area. That's the exudates putting out carbon, feeding the microorganisms. And as that root is going in now, you can see it's building that soil, changing this highly acidic, low nutrient soil into a high nutrient soil. See that, that's what roots and photosynthesis do, and they release all these nutrients out of the soil. Let's look at other ways that this system is being used here in Australia. This is in a temperate area with a Mediterranean climate. What this farmer did is, instead of tilling out his permanent pastures, think about this the same like what the prairies are in the Midwest as permanent grasslands. Instead of tilling them out and killing them, spraying them out and spending a lot of money on diesel and fertilizers, he just grazes it down. Remember what happens if he grazes it down? It sheds all the roots. And what I showed you before was a perennial grass that lives in a perennial pasture like this. The roots get shed down, and then he just used modified no-till equipment, because you've got to modify it to cut through the root mass of a perennial pasture, and planted oats into it. Now, the basic ecological science here is that annuals always come up in perennial systems. So if we work with agroecology, work with science, get our timing right. In other words, we take the pasture down so it's very low, it's not competing. We put in an annual at the right time. It grows through. Now, he gets the same yield as his neighbors who spend a fortune in plowing out, spraying, a fortune in fertilizers. In the beginning, he put a little bit of phosphorus in because Australian soils are very deficient in phosphate, but he doesn't need that now because the biology releases the locked up phosphorus. Plus, as you can see, when he takes the oats off, he's got perennial pasture in the underneath the oats. He can put his sheep, in this case, he uses sheep, back onto it, and he gets a double income. This is his soil, and this is work done by Dr. Christine Jones, who many of you would know, and myself and others regard her as one of the foremost soil scientists on our planet. And where this is really important is this property was inherited by two brothers after the father died, and they essentially put a fence down the middle of one of the fields. One brother uses standard stock rates and standard tillage. The other brother, Cole, he was the one who basically invented pasture cropping. And you can have a look there and you see the difference in the soils and the deep, dark, rich chocolate brown soil. You can see the numbers that Christine Jones has measured, the increases in carbon. And the reason why I'm talking about soil carbon is that soil carbon or soil organic matter is a really important proxy for soil health. The more carbon we have, the more biology, the more life. This is really important. And biology is very, very complex. But we can use soil organic matter levels or soil carbon levels as a really good proxy for soil health and soil biology. The more we have, the more biology. The other thing you can see here is how he's increased all his nutrients. Like I said, the only nutrient he put in the beginning was a little bit of phosphorus. So look at the increases. He hasn't brought any fertilizer on. He's taken 2 crops off, oats and wool and meat. 3 crops really, but wool and meat come from grazing. But what I'm trying to show here is that if we use the biology, what we can do is make this vast store of minerals that we actually have in the soil that are locked up. They're in forms that plants can't use. The biology now changes them into forms that are plant available. That's how we build fertility. And all that comes from photosynthesis. This is another example of how we're doing it in Australia. Cole Seiss was the first person to do it. Other people, looked at it and said, okay, how can we build on what Cole has done? How can we improve it? This is the wonderful thing that we as farmers do when you've got farmers who are innovators. One person innovates, another person looks at it and says, okay, let's take this to another level. So he's designed a better way to break up the root mass in the pasture, because these are perennial pastures. They've got a thick root mass. And what this does is just breaks it up, lifts it up, also aerates the soil, throws a bit of it over as a top dressing. Where this is really important is that when we sow a crop, when it's small, that's when weed competition from roots and other plants are most critical. And in the beginning, we want to make sure that our crop has the advantage and is not affected by weed competition from roots or out-competed for sunlight. We want to make sure also that we put the nutrients next to it. So in this case, you can see little tubes going down the back. He puts a little bit of guano or compost just to get that in with the seeds, just to get it in. So this is one pass, by the way, just after he's grazed, or sometimes we'll put a mulcher over it. He just runs this through, seeds it with a little bit of guano, to just a little bit of biology or nutrients to the seeds. And then you can see what he's done here is what we call a cow salad. It's a mix of about 10 to 15 different species. We're learning now that the more species we have, the better the resilience, the better the growth, the better the biomass, the more efficient we are at capturing sunlight. And in his case, he's doubled his stock carrying capacity with this system. What is really important here, he's the first farmer in the world to be paid under a government regulated system for taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. The first year he did was 15.6 metric tons of soil organic matter. He got paid for 11 tons of carbon dioxide per hectare his first year, and then last year he increased it to 13 tons because you get paid on carbon dioxide. So where this is important is to show these levels of soil organic matter. Myself and others, we've talked about it. Every time we mention these high levels, we get ridiculed because most of the agronomists will say this is impossible to do. Well, this has been verified under the Australian government's own rigorous soil carbon testing system, and they paid him on it. That's, to me, is more rigorous than any peer-reviewed scientific paper. We've actually had the top scientists in Australia testing it based on their methodology, which is one of the toughest on the planet. So this is really rigorous, evidence-based, levels of building up soil organic matter. And once again, he's not spraying it out, not plowing it out. He's not bringing in tons of fertilizer, just the cost of seeds, a mix of seeds and a little bit, say 50 kilos of guano per hectare, 50 pounds of guano per acre, if I want to, put it into acres. It's a nothing. Then this is what the Rodale Institute has started, many of you probably seen it in North America, in Pennsylvania, using a roller crimper. And I won't go into detail here. If you go into the Rodale site, you'll see different ways of doing it. In this case, they plant vetch out, which is not, these systems won't be so good for Baileys because vetch is winter growing, and our climate's generally too warm for vetch. What happens, you grow it over winter and then it starts to die off in summer. So in the case of these systems, they can grow it as a cover crop over winter, apart from, the areas that are, in the far north, in the prairie areas of the US where things are frozen rock solid. But for most of the East Coast and a lot of the West Coast and the south of the US, in the temperate zones, vetches will grow over winter and then roll it at flowering time just before it's going to die. And you can just plant the corn into it. It's like a mulch. The vetches will put all the nitrogen in as the corn grows up. It shades any weeds over. And, these sort of systems are getting higher yields than the conventional systems of plowing out, using lots of herbicides, spraying out a GMO corn and whatever, spraying it out, as Roundup Ready, and putting tons of fertilizers. Here, they got 160 bushels per acre in Pennsylvania, which is, 30 bushels higher than the county average there. The other one, which I think is really important, is you look at the reduction in the amount of, they put it in liters per hectare, but just think pints per acre of diesel. It's close enough. The compared to conventional tillage, which is 231 pints per acre of diesel, this organic no-till is just 77. That's a massive saving for farmers, also in time, because you're using the tractor a lot less, wear and tear, but also for the environment and greenhouse gases as well. So what I want to do, basically use this for, is to set the scene now for the cultural control of pests and diseases. The first part was to show you how to build soil health. I think the really important thing I wanted to show here is why herbicides aren't necessary. In fact, why herbicides are a disaster. We've got to move away from killing things as weeds and understand how to manage them so we can maximize photosynthesis and reduce competition. And the most simplest way to do that is to cut their leaves. Not rocket science. Cut their leaves, that way they're smaller, they don't outcompete our cash crop for light, and their roots shrink. So they don't compete for water or nutrients. Simple as that. But what I was trying to show there is by doing this, we build soil health. And in organic agriculture, we've talked about it for a long time. I used to be ridiculed for it. I can remember even back in 2011, that's only 10 years ago, I published a paper on soil carbon sequestration in organic farming. And one of the peer reviewers wanted me to pull out the concept of soil health. Said, "Oh, there's no such thing." You know, I had to argue with it to get it into this peer-reviewed paper in Acta Horticultura, which is one of the main scientific journals. I've learned a long time. I argue with my peer reviewers. I don't accept things I don't agree with. You know, when I know I'm right. And I base it on science. But it goes back to the basis of organic agriculture. And the first, our first organisations were called Healthy Soil Societies. And in the UK, it still is. You know, the Soil Society is still the major, one of the oldest organic organisations because it's based on soil health. Now soil health is accepted in the mainstream. And it is a really important principle still in successful regenerative organic farming. Most pests and diseases are opportunistic. That means they attack plants that are stressed. So if we correctly balance our soil, I haven't got time to talk about that part of it, but the critical part is the 95%. Getting the soil organic matter up. If we get that correctly balanced, we will ensure there's minimal pest and disease damage. So I want to give you examples. This is Ethiopia. And this is a field trial. This is the scientist looking at examining the two fields. This was actually done by, when I was president of IFARM, one of our member organisations in Ethiopia where we're working with the farmers, and we wanted to get them to use compost as a way of successfully doubling their yields. And of course, you had the standard agronomist said, "Oh no, you know, you've got to use fertilizers." So here's a trial. This is the same soil, the same variety of wheat grown at the same time. One with chemical fertilizers, the other with compost that we taught the villagers how to make. They're in the same climate. There's they've got a rainy period and rust has got into the fields. The conventionally grown wheat has to be sprayed with fungicides to control the rust, otherwise the whole crop would die. The composted treated field has minimal. Look at the difference. So the conventional is infected with striped rust. You can actually see the infections on the leaves. And I want to get back to, what are we talking about before? Photosynthesis. So this damage is stopping photosynthesis. If you've got the leaves infected, it's not photosynthesizing. It's not feeding the roots. It can't do much. So even spraying with a fungicide, you know, they got a yield of, you know, 1,600 pounds an acre. The composted, you know, you can see a little bit of rust here and there, but getting back to the concept of soil health, healthy plants can fight off diseases, just like us. If we look after ourselves, we're healthy, have a good diet, we are better at fighting diseases. Plants are no different. They also have immune systems. And, you know, this one got 6,500 pounds per acre. This is work done by Dr. David Johnson in New Mexico. And BEAM is because of biologically enhanced agricultural management, but it's a really simple way of making an incredibly highly aerated compost. It's probably got the greatest diversity of microorganisms I've seen in any analysis for a compost. It is phenomenal. End of the day, I think, the picture says everything. You've got the conventional where they put in 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre. And then Beam, after, 1.5 years of building up some soil fertility, just putting on a bit of compost, more than doubled the yield. Look at the health of the plant, fraction of the price. And you don't have to spray it with all the toxic chemicals. This is what I want to show you. And I want to show you this because this is a scientific field trial. This is good science. But you know what? It's so good that all the peer-reviewed papers are rejecting this. This is the other thing which annoys me. Every time we come out with something like this, they go, no, can't be. We will be the laughing stock, so we won't publish your scientific paper. For God's sake, he's a professor. He's a good scientist. And this is good evidence-based science. And it should be out there to change the way we farm, to show we don't need toxic chemicals. There is good science, good scientists. This is my own farm. I grow tropical fruits. And Leeson Bayleys, I don't have to explain what this plant is. And most of the places in the world, no one's ever seen a papaya. But we get a dreadful sort of bug that saps it and will actually kill the top of the papaya, called a fruit spotting bug. And our farmers for years in Australia fought to keep endosulfan, one of the last relatives of DDT, for, we're the second last country in the world to ban it, because they said, we have to have this toxic chemical, otherwise we can't grow papayas, we can't grow avocados, can't grow macadamias. This bug is just resistant to everything. In my place, what do? If I see it, I know that I've got a problem with my soil. I put good compost around it, make sure it's properly watered. Normally this happens when I'm, because I travel a lot and I go away and I'm not keeping the water up properly. So the plant gets stressed out and then it gets attacked. I come back, give them some TLC and they fix themselves up. And what's really interesting is what I can do then, the plant doesn't actually kill the bug, but it puts something out that makes the bug really slow. I can just pick them off with my fingers. They don't fly away or run away, which means all the predators birds and things that eat them, just go and pick them off. And that's the end of them. So let's talk about this now and introduce a concept that I think is very important. We introduced it actually properly in Rio +20, but ecological functional intensification. This is as our counter to what was called, what's the name? Doesn't know. The word will come to me, but the counter, the intensification, which was chemical and pesticide intensification that they were trying to put out as the best way to limit environmental damage by we can grow more on less acres by putting in more chemicals, So we wanted to intensify the ecology and eco functions, and this is by looking at functional biodiversity. And these are other species that we can put into our system that can help us. And this biodiversity we power by sunlight using leaves. And so we're using ecological processes rather than chemical. And it's about the applied science of agroecology to increase biodiversity. We increase biodiversity, and this biodiversity delivers various functions that we need. So let's talk about it in terms of pest control. That's what we're here today. And the concept of insectaries. We use refuges of flowering plants. We call it insectaries. That's because many of our beneficial insects are the natural enemies of our pests. They have host plants. What a lot of them, such as parasitic wasps, hoverflies, lacewings, their larvae is carnivorous. However, the adult stages need nectar and pollen from flowers. They particularly need it to get what we call pseudo hormones, the basic building blocks of their hormones to become sexually reproductive. Without them, the boys can't be boys, the girls can't be girls, and they can't make babies. Best way to put it. In many cases, they also need them because, you know, nectar is full of glucose, it's energy. Pollen is full of protein, the building blocks as well. They're very rich food sources. So what you see here in these pictures, I just want to show you some of the parasitic wasps are feeding on these little flowers. And can I say they're very important pollinators as well. The flowers give out the nectar and pollen because it's a trade in nature. It's called synergy and mutualism. Mutualism, where you help each other. Synergy is where you not only do you help each other, but the benefit for both is even greater. So here the flower, in terms of saying, look, I'll give you guys some nectar. That's why they put out nectar for insects. They don't need it. They need pollen, but we'll give you some of the pollen as well, but you go to other flowers and pollinate so we can reproduce. Then the females will lay their eggs in or next to the pest, say the caterpillar, and then the larvae will hatch outside the caterpillar or feed on it. It's actually where Alien came from, the movie. It's based on how parasitic wasps do it. They lay their egg inside the host, and then it grows in there and then emerges out as a larvae, and then will turn into a adult. But what's very important here is, I want to get back to, they'll emerge as a larvae, but if there's no flowers in the system, they cannot become sexually mature adults to make the next generation. This is really important. Most of our farming systems are biological deserts because we spray out these little flowers because they're weeds, especially with all the Roundup Ready stuff now. You know, things like, you know, everybody talks about, you know, the monarch butterflies are crashing because of the spraying out of milkweed, because of Roundup and herbicides. But we've got insect Armageddon around the world at the moment. And one of the main reasons is the spraying out of all these little flowers that people call weeds. But these are functional biodiversity because they're the host plants of the species that control our pests. So insects are crashing, except for the pests species in our crops, because we have designed a system that's just heaven for our pest species, hell for everything else. This is my farm. What I did when I learned this, I let all these little flowering plants that my neighbors call weeds grow underneath my trees as host plants. I actually think it looks very nice having flowers, an understory of flowers underneath. Much better than brown dead soil from herbicides. These are other examples, you know, in the Midwest, and examples where we can plant rows of along our borders of different flowering plants as host plants. The one in the top right-hand corner, this is actually in Nebraska, and this farmer actually, you know, those blocks are, you know, the classic square mile, or, you know, the you know, from those days. He planted the perimeter with trees. All the neighbors thought he was mad doing it, But that alone has turned out to be a really good refuge full of beneficial plants. Then the other one is in Michigan at the bottom, Michael Field Institute, where they're trialing a range of different little herbs and plants. We can use a lot of herbs and different things with flowers and put them in rows. This is Myanmar. I wanted to show you Myanmar because this is actually at 17 degrees north in exactly the same climate as you are. It's just in Asia. And here, they're actually growing, in this case, rain-fed rice rather than paddies, but putting a border of sunflowers around it. It's a really good way. Sunflowers are a great refuge plant, and you get the beneficials. Also, yellow is really good for attracting, as what we call a trap crop. It actually attracts a lot of the pest species. They go in there and they get eaten by the beneficial insects in the sunflowers. And of course, in their case, they've made it wide enough that they can harvest the sunflowers to get sunflower kernels as well, get a second crop. Another really simple way of doing it, and I actually learned this out of University of California, Davis, is strip mowing. If you've got, in my case, an orchard, instead of mowing it all in one go, leave refuges, strips. And you can see there that by leaving that, you increase the amount of beneficials such as spiders, assassin bugs, the parasitic wasps, ladybugs, lacewings, etc. You've got more where we leave a strip. So in my place, I mow in stages. I always leave one area as a refuge. So in that, I've got all the beneficial species. And you can see here, I'll mow in stages. At some point, I will mow this down, but there'll be other parts that have regrown as a refuge. So my place will always look, never neat and tidy in the standard sense. But for me, based on good ecological science, it looks really nice because I know that in that area there, I can put my hand in it and all the beneficial insects will come out. It's alive and it protects my crops. I don't have to spray. Originally, I had to spray, dipel and different organically allowed insecticides. I lent my sprayer to a neighbor over 10 years ago, 15 years ago, to tell the truth. Never asked for it back. I don't need it. On all our farms, we have these little nuisance areas. And a lot of them, they can spray it out, but we can redesign them with beneficial species and put them in. This is in Bhutan, where, we can put a lot of these flowers in. A lot of them actually are our weeds, so-called weeds anyway, but we can put in this case, they've got trees that they can use as stock feed that they cut. There's a lot of forage trees we have in the tropics that we can use, like Gliricidias. I saw so many of them that you have in Baileys. But it brings in also small birds, which eat an enormous amount of insects, little lizards, and plus we can manage these areas by using it as forage for livestock and also as biomass for compost. So 4 good rules for insectaries. Any flowering plant that attracts bees is an insectary plant. But a lot of them, like the parasitic wasps, the bees, the European bees are the bully girls because they're all girls, and they bully the smaller insects. The parasitic wasps are just little teeny little things, smaller than, some cases the size of a pinhead. So they love these little insignificant flowers. The bees don't bother with them. So these little insignificant weedy little flowers are just the perfect ones for them. Of course, the other rule, the greater the diversity of species, the more we can have in it, the greater the diversity of insects we'll get, the more plants, species. And the other one, the taller it is, the more we can do it. Think of it like You can fit a lot more people in Manhattan than, you know, you can in a country town, simply because you can vertically stack them. It's the same with insectaries. If we can build hedges or high areas, we dramatically increase the amount of beneficial insects. We can also design insectary calendars. This is actually, you know, once again, out of California with California species. But we can sit down and work out what flowers when and design it also for, particularly for different crops. You know, if we know when mangoes are flowering or lychees are flowering or you know, different things, we can make sure we have insectary plants in flower to bring them in at the time. So once again, I'm talking about rethinking and designing, using ecological science, you know, to do the system. Let's just give a few examples here and a few concepts. I haven't got time to go into it in real detail. Just to let everybody know, we'll have a book out on this maybe next month, maybe in July. I'm not quite certain, with Acres USA. And I have a whole chapter where I go into great detail on this and multiple ways to do it. But today, you know, it's just to get the concepts across. Trap crops. And these are insectaries that can trap pest species. I showed you the example of sunflowers in Myanmar. We bring them in. A preferred host. This is where we find another plant that our pest prefers over our crop. And we use it to draw it away from our crop. And then there are other plants that will repel the pest, called continuous repellent. So now I want to show how this is applied for growing maize in Africa. And this is really important because maize is actually the most important grain in the world. It's the major grain, of course, in the Americas, in Africa, and in Asia, it is second to rice. More maize is grown than any other grain on the planet. And everywhere, we have problems with various sorts of, moss caterpillars that attack them, stem borers. And everywhere we have various weeds. In Africa, they have a terrible weed actually called striga or striga. People pronounce it differently. That's parasitic. It actually lives on the roots of the other plants and pulls the nutrients out. What the solution is normally is to spray it with insecticides, and of course the solution now is to being genetically modified, so it makes its own insecticides and genetically modify it so it's resistant to Roundup, so we can spray Roundup to kill all the weeds, and everybody's in heaven, or were. But now, of course, that is failing dramatically all around the world. They've led to the new super weeds like Palmer amaranth that just grow over and destroy these maize. So then they've got to get new systems with new, even more toxic herbicides. In this case, they wanted to use agroecological science. They got together a team of scientists with different skills and knowledge sets, which is the best way to do it instead of working in silos. And they looked at how to use functional biodiversity, in other words, eco-function intensification. So they found that a legume called Desmodium repels these moss. The moss, it gives off these volatile chemicals that the moth doesn't like. It's its way of defending against pests by giving off these chemicals. Then they found that there's other grass, such as Napier grass, but Guinea grass, you've actually got a lot of them growing wild in Baileys. I checked them out when I was there. And these are a preferred host. They're also a trap crop. And to give you an example here, this is a field trial. And you can see the standard maize, the control and that lovely flowering plant, which is the parasitic weed striga. And you can see why they under these systems, the combination of the weed, the parasitic weed and the moss, they get a terrible yield. Have a look right next door. The only treatment is growing the desmodium under the maize. Look at the difference. No chemicals, no spray, no GM. We're using functional biodiversity. This is what I mean by eco-function intensification, where we rethink plants. Instead of thinking, oh, I won't put the desmodium in it because it's a weed, it's going to compete. We use the concepts of mutualism and synergy. It's mutually beneficial. It's synergistic because 1 and 1 in synergy, instead of equaling 2, equals 3 or 4. That yield is up to 10 times higher. So let's dive down more into it. And this is the silverleaf desmodium. This is, you have this and you have other native desmodiums in Baileys. Everywhere we have desmodiums. You can trial your own wild desmodiums. They all suppress weeds. We have a word for this. It's called selective allelopathy. And I haven't got time to go into it, but it's where plants will put out compounds that kill other plants. That's allelopathy. So in the case of the desmodium, it causes the suicidal germination of the weed seeds. But it's selective. It doesn't hurt our maize. In fact, it helps our maize because it's a legume. It gives our maize nitrogen. Now, getting back to what I was saying before in terms of the 95% light competition, it is not competing with our maize. It's not competing with our maize because it is lower down. What is it doing? It's getting the light that our maize is not using. We are maximizing solar energy. Now we're using solar energy for pest control, for weed control, because this repels the pests. It actually attracts the natural enemies as well. This is the other thing. Those same chemicals that repel the pest, our natural enemies can smell it and go, okay, that's a cue to them to go in there to get the pests. And it provides high protein stock feed. It protects the soil as well from erosion, keeps the soil covered. And then the Napier grass, it's a trap. In other words, the corn borer will go to the Napier grass before it goes to the corn. So you plant the Napier grass on the outside of the field. It's the same way as you saw the sunflowers are planted. They work as a trap to stop the pests from going into the field. It goes to the Napier grass, but the Napier grass also is, has its defenses. So most of these grasses, if you go into tall Guinea grass or sugarcane, and it's itchy and scratchy, they have all these fine silica hairs. They're there. They use silica as a defense against pests. These little sharp hairs are like shards of glass, the caterpillars. They go in. The other thing a lot of grasses do is they have this, you'll see this sort of sticky exudate. That's there because when caterpillars go on it, they get stuck in it. It's like a glue, stops them from moving. So they have two defenses. They actually kill, the Napier grass kills its pests. It breaks the breeding cycle. And the grass in these systems is also harvested as stock feed. A lot of these farmers in Kenya, they used to go hungry for 3 months of the year, couldn't feed their children. And I always remember one time when I was there, and they had this black taro growing in one of the rivers. You know what taro is, the elephant leaf. You do have it in Baileys. I said, do you guys eat that? I said, no, it's poisonous. Oh, okay, so just an ornamental. Oh yeah, we use it as famine food. And I said, but if it's poisonous, how do you use it as famine food? They go, well, what we do is we harvest it and we boil it, and we boil it all night long until the children fall asleep. And even today, that sort of breaks me up, to think that there's still happening to children like that. These poor little kids hoping for a meal and they fall asleep and don't get one. And these people were taken out of this abject poverty. Poverty kills. They've got nice houses. The children go to school. They can afford medical care. It's just changed their life. And it's just so simple. It's just such a success story. And what I wanted to say too, they actually use the grass and the desmodium now to, as well as having enough maize, to have a dairy cow. So, and the children get milk, and the surplus milk they sell every day in the village as an extra income. So we looked at this system in Africa, and then, like I said, I gave the example of pasture cropping in Australia, where other Australian farmers looked at it and said, okay, can we improve this? Well, African farmers are the same as farmers everywhere else. They said, oh, if this works in maize, does it work in sorghum? Does it work in millet? It did. And someone else says, I wonder if it works in mangoes. And another person said, oh, what about if it works in chilies? And it does. And they put in, the same system, the same thing with desmodium, with napier or other similar grasses. Some of them added alfalfa, because that's a really good legume, but a really good insectary plant as well. And they produce really high yields without any pesticides. This mango orchard, most of them were absolutely perfect. When I went there, this farmer, she's one of the best farmers in Ethiopia, and she's now actually a millionaire. And I mean a millionaire in our dollars, not in their money, out of this system. Started with nothing and became so successful, and just uses photosynthesis and natural rainfall. And her husband was actually the local chief of police. Now he's getting a higher income working for her. I just want to give these as real world examples of what can be done with these systems. So I just want to end now just with a summary of this. And this is my own farm. I took this picture one day because that's my shed there. I was just walking past the tree and I could see the light on my cover crop, is legume vine, and these are rambutans. And in those days, I used to export perfect rambutans all around the world, including to Japan. So, I had high yields of perfect fruit. The Japanese are really fussy, believe me, 100% perfect. And I took that because it said everything about the way I farm. So my place at the moment looks a bit like this. And, for my neighbors, I am the messiest, weediest farmer. I'm letting these weeds overtake my trees. I'm just, slack, whatever, mismanaged. That's the attitude. Let's look at the way I look at it. I took that because what I wanted to show is those legume vines there are using the sunlight that my cash crop is not using. That's what I wanted to talk about today, maximizing solar energy. They're capturing that. They're not competing with my cash crop. My cash crop gets first opportunity to get the light. That's the theory. But it doesn't use all of it. I want to maximize solar energy to give ecosystem services. So now what my cash crop isn't using, I am now powering these other systems. So we're not competing for sunlight. These legume vines are fixing free nitrogen. I don't spend any money on nitrogen fertilizers. It's giving me soil carbon. In other words, it's big, and the roots are adding nutrients. That's what I want to get here. It's not competing. I actually cut this down once a year at the end of the wet season. And what happens when I cut it down? All those roots break down and add nutrients into the soil. So I don't let it. My rule is I don't let them outcompete for light. This time of year in the wet season, there's no competition for water here. When we get 150 to 200 inches, I don't have to worry about that. In fact, I've got to worry about waterlogging. So the more plants I've got to take up water, the better. And, I manage it. These have got flowers, so they give me pest control for free, and they conserve water. I cut it down at the end of the rainy season, and by cutting it down, and what have I've got now? I've got mulch, combination of living and dead mulch, to shade my soil and conserve my moisture in the dry season, plus cool the soil. This time of year for you guys, go out with a thermometer and put a thermometer on bare soil out in the direct sun at midday. See how hot it is. 130, 140 degrees. You're baking the soil, killing all the microorganisms. Take that same thermometer under a tree that's well mulched. What will it be? Probably about 80 degrees, which is just perfect for the microorganisms. I want to, put this and show how important living vegetation is for soil life, instead of dead soils, toxic chemicals. This is the same principle again in Italy, in an apricot orchard. The ground covers aren't competing for light. They're not competing with the roots. The roots of the cash crop are lower down. And we've got a cover crop. We've got green manure. It's fixing nitrogen and carbon. And the flowers attract beneficial insects. It conserves water. It's a living mulch on the soil. This is not a neglected orchard. I remember when I went there and people thought this organic orchard, another messy, neglected organic orchard. But I hope now, with what I've explained today, to say, actually, this is best practice. This is what we should aim for. This incredible biodiversity to get eco-function intensification, all the services, and we're maximizing solar energy. So I want to end on this, because this is the standard best practice in agronomy. This is a olive orchard in Spain, but if I was to take you to the Central Valley of California, to the almond orchards or whatever, this is what you'll see. Bare soil. Why do you get, you've got to get rid of the weeds because they compete for nutrients and they compete for water. Let's have a look at this. Minimal solar capture. There's no fix of nitrogen or soil carbon. There's no, those soils will have less than 1% organic matter. If you want nitrogen, you have to bring it in, by the bag, buy it. There's no flowers to attract beneficial insects. So if you've got pests, what do? You have to use pesticides. If a beneficial insect accidentally flew in there, it'd starve to death and die. There's nothing there for it. It does not conserve water. And this is what I want to get across here with this. idiotic, it actually is, unscientific thing. Oh, we've got to get rid of the weeds because they transpire and they get rid of water. This, in the middle of summer, that soil, like I said, you put a thermometer there, 130, 140 degrees. What happens is we call it the wick effect. The water, any soil moisture, that heat, it basically goes through the capillaries of the soil and gets taken out. This will lose water, whereas a living mulch will conserve water. And the other thing too, by the way, is that leaves actually work as what we call cloud strippers. We know a lot now, particularly in desert areas, that a high percentage of the water doesn't come from rain, it comes from leaves stripping the condensation at night. We're learning more and more now that keep plants to keep water. The one thing you've got to do is just get the root management right so that our crops, cash crops roots, are lower than the cover crop or the living mulch. That soil is subject to wind and water erosion. They're losing soil. So for me, this is exactly what we need to avoid. And I just want to end back to here, you know, these are Mediterranean climates. What is regarded as standard good practice, but what we should be aiming for in exactly the same climate as eco-function intensification. So I'll leave it at that. I hope what I've done is made you rethink your systems, how agriculture works, and what we should be aiming for, that we want living systems. That's a dead system. This is a living system that's powered by solar energy. So thanks. I'll open it up now. If I can, having trouble trying to get out of screen share. Let's try it this way. Here we go. Go back to the real world now, or the real Zoom world.
Do we talk now?
(101), the general principles. And if it goes well, then I will put out further books where I will go into greater detail. The critical thing for me was to actually just get out the information on the basic principles, and for people then to innovate and try them. But there'll be more than enough information. I've got lists of plants, lists of insects, you know, general lists. But if we wanted to dive down to specific crops, that's more detail. And I didn't want to make the book like an encyclopedia at this stage.
Okay. Can the method of using cover crop be used for small backyard gardeners?
Oh yeah, very much. Exactly the same way. And I would say that probably the best way for cover crops for small backyard gardeners is to look at different legumes, beans, and grow those, or a combination of plants. But the thing is, this is that we can, you know, in a backyard, there's lots of things that we can eat that we can use as cover crops. You know, for instance, I'll give you an example. One of the things I'm doing at the moment is that I like to make what I call no-till gardens. And I'll get all the things like all my old palm leaves, coconut leaves, all those sorts of things. Take a while to break down, and cardboard, and put cardboard over an area of ground, pile it up with the palm leaves, and then plant pumpkins or squash over the top of it during the rainy season. And soon, you know, now the rainy season's finished, and as the pumpkins and squash finish, I will pull that apart and then plant in different beans and legumes. And you know, one of the things that you have in bay leaves, for instance, is some very good, you know, tropical, heaps of them, tropical beans that you can grow over the wet season to use as very good cover crops to put in nitrogen, but also as beans to eat. So yeah, there's just so many ways you can do it when you think it through.
Okay. Would you recommend marigolds as a desirable flower crop?
Marigolds, yeah, look, they're a wonderful crop, but the truth is, any flower that grows will be good. Any flower that attracts bees is desirable. So the more the better. You know, I grow heaps of things, orchids, you know, anthuriums, you name it, busy lizards. You know, we've got so many nice little tropical flowers. I love the fact I've got flowers all year round, and grow them around my house, in my house garden. Have other ones, you know, that a whole range of them that come up underneath my orchards. One of the ones I really love is pinto peanut. Actually, you have that in bay leaves. It grows very well as a ground cover because it's low, it's prostate, so it doesn't compete for light, and it fixes really good nitrogen, holds in the soil, and the little pea flowers attract the beneficial insects.
Okay. The Department of Agriculture has invested in reproducing beneficial insects for biological control. Is this a cost-effective method?
Well, it is for chemical farmers, I suppose, or maybe pesticides probably are still cheaper. But, you know, I would argue that you don't need to. You know, I don't buy in any insects. If you grow the plants, you will get more. The work done, actually, once again by UC Davis, showed that by planting insectaries, it was the equivalent, and this is actually stuff that was done 20 years ago, so it'd be more, you know, worth more value now, but it's the equivalent of something like $40,000 an acre if you bought them. That's how much you can grow. Plus, you get more species by redesigning your system. You know, what's going on here is what I call substitution. You know, basically, they're thinking, oh, okay, we've got to move away from pesticides. and we've got to move away from fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, because of the damage they're doing. So we'll substitute them. In other words, we'll substitute them with botanical pesticides, and by buying in beneficial insects, we'll substitute synthetic fertilizers with biofertilizers. One of the reasons why it hasn't worked so well is because these substitutes tend to be more expensive and in many cases tend to be less effective. And so farmers start doing it, and then they just go back to the poison bottle. They go back to what they know. What we have to do is redesign new systems, rethink based on, why I wanted to start with solar energy is that is the basis of life. That's the basis of agriculture. Go back to basics and get the science right and redesign our systems based on that. Move away from dead toxic chemicals to living biology and biological sciences, ecological sciences.
Another question. This person's having a difficult time fighting fungal and bacterial issues in her backyard garden. Do you have any advice to help her fight those?
Okay. I'd like to know, has she identified which fungi? Are they soil? Are they on the plant? I just need to know what type, and then and the answer is yes. There's always a solution.
Powder mildew.
Okay, powder mildew. You know what? Probably one of the best and most. Okay, there's a whole range of things here, and I'll, in the long term, get the soil right. Is really important. Like I showed you with the wheat in Ethiopia, how important that is. In the short term, we can use soft fungicides. So examples of ones that work really well are baking soda that changes the pH. Just mix it up and just start with a small trial spray, just and different levels, different strengths, and just do some small trials. Another really good one, the one that I used here, is wettable sulfur, and I like sulfur. Don't you use one and then you use the other? What happens with baking soda? It changes the pH to alkaline, and that disrupts them. Then 2 weeks later, if you use something like wettable sulfur, that turns into sulfuric acid. So that changes the pH another way, but that actually does damage the fungi. The wonderful thing about sulfur in the tropics, most of our soils are actually deficient sulfur, so it's a good one. You can also use copper sulfate. Now, you hear as people saying, "Oh, organic allows the use of copper." Actually, our soils in the tropics are deficient in copper. Copper is a really important trace element. We don't have the problems in Europe and stuff where they have overused it and got copper toxicity. And one of the differences between copper and some of the toxic fungicides is that, copper is a really important trace element for our plants and also for us. Without copper, we die. However, we need small amounts of copper. We don't need small amounts of synthetic fungicides. They're toxic to us and are not trace elements. So copper is another good one, or copper sulfate. And then the last one, which we use very effectively in Australia, are milk and milk products. Just mix up a bit of powdered milk bit of yogurt, fresh milk, whatever, and dilute it and spray it on. It is one of the most effective fungicides. Get rid of molds. It actually desiccates them. You know, and all of these solutions are non-toxic. You know, for us, using baking soda, having some baking soda residues on your plants is not going to hurt you. You know, people don't die of baking soda toxicity because of bread. In bread, you know, we've been eating baking soda forever. You know, and so all of these can work. And what I suggest is you use all of them so you don't get into the trap of developing resistance. Each one works in a different way, so it will never get resistant, and just rotate them every few weeks. You should be able to control the fungi mold.
Okay, do you ever recommend neem as pesticide?
Neem has a role. Look, the answer is yes. It's an interesting one because it disrupts the normal growing of insects. It's been used successfully for thousands of years in Asia. And I just want to say too that despite some of the disinformation, it's been used successfully. It's eaten in India for thousands of years. It's actually very good for intestinal parasites and things. People eat neem leaves or feed them to their stock, or neem seeds. India, they also brush their teeth with the neem twigs. Instead of using toothbrushes, they get the twig, just smash the end with a hammer or a rock, and it just turns into, you know, little, you know, fine hairs like a toothbrush, and then you can brush your teeth with it. And they swear by it for giving healthy gums, getting rid of gum infections, and keeping healthy teeth. So yeah, neem is good. It'll grow, I suppose, you have it in Bailey's, it'll grow wild there.
All right. And then a few years ago, let me see, at the Regeneration Blees conference, you said that there was no better rotation crop than hemp because of its ability to choke out unwanted weeds and clean the soil. Can you elaborate on this just a little bit?
All right, look, well, why I said it for Bailey's, what hemp does, you know, if you grow, you know, I'm talking industrial hemp here, by the way, grows really tall. It grows a canopy. It outcompetes all the weeds. But one of the reasons why we like it is it breaks up heavy clays in tropical soils, opens them up, puts in so much organic matter. You know, after a hemp crop, the soil is just improved so much. So it's a really good cover crop, produces an enormous biomass. Now, if you can't, you know, I suppose what I was going to, I'd say, you know, most people want to grow it for the biomass, for fiber or whatever benefits of hemp. This is industrial hemp, but if you can't sell it, so what? Just run over it with the tractor, slash it down, let it rot into the soil. That soil will be so fertile. It is a very good tropical cover crop. There are heaps of others, but I just, you know, wanted to mention hemp as an easy one.
And do you know, does milkweed grow in Belize? And I'm not sure that's one that you would know the answer to.
No, well, look, I should. And the answer is yes, it would. I don't remember seeing it, but there's no reason why there wouldn't be a milkweed species. It grows all through the Americas, and there are temperate and tropical species. There's many species of milkweed, and monarchs, go through a large area. Although technically they overwinter to the north of you in Mexico. But I'm pretty certain, yeah, that there'll be milkweed or milkweed relatives, that's for sure.
Okay, and someone did respond and said, yes, it does grow in Belize. And do you have any remedies for like black spot or spider mites?
Okay, sulfur.
Sulfur.
That's what I use. Wettable sulfur. The other one for spider mites are the horticultural oils. The way they work, these oils, is they're not toxic, but they cover the breathing pores. The insects have breathing pores, a bit like our nose and mouth. The best way to say it, if you're an insect and this oil gets in there, it's a bit like essentially getting grease out of a grease gun, putting up our nose and down our throat. We couldn't breathe, we choke. So it actually suffocates them. It doesn't poison them. And they biodegrade very rapidly.
Okay, great. Then the last question I see so far is in reference to like knowing that you have to know what plants will attract the beneficial insects, but doesn't that depend on the pests that you're trying to control?
Yes and no. Can I just say that, look, there are papers, getting right down the specifics. I just wanted to show you the push-pull where scientists will actually get down to specific species that attract and repel specific pests. That work is in its infancy. Most scientists aren't doing that work. They're still doing work on better pesticides or how to apply it or which pesticide, okay? We've got a huge deficiency in it. So what we have to do, we're the pioneers in this. We can't go to our local Department of Agriculture and say, which plant do I plant to put which beneficial insect to control which pest in my crop? They wouldn't know what you're talking about. That's where we're at. So this is where what I wanted to do is just get across general principles. I would argue that find as many flowering plants as you can find. The higher the biodiversity, the more beneficials. There are so many beneficials. They'll already be there. And many of these little weeds that we have, they already have their parasitic wasps and their species of lacewings and their species of hoverflies. It already exists. We've already got an ecology. Let's work with the native ecology we've got. We don't have to spend money bringing things in and getting them adapted. They're here. We increase it. How do we increase it? We increase the biodiversity and the amount of these plants. The more we increase them, the more beneficials we get, the more options we have of controlling our pests.
Okay, and another one, do you have any suggestion for nematode removal?
Okay, they're a lot of fun, nematodes, aren't they? And the best way to remove nematodes, the first way is what we call a trap crop. And the best trap crop is the actual crop, the cash crop that we want to grow. So we plant that really early in the season and wait a few weeks so the nematodes, eggs hatch in the soil, they go in and then plow it in, destroy it. And what we do now is we break a breeding cycle. Now, once you've done that, you lowered it. The next thing to do is we don't plant our cash crop back in there. We plant a cover crop that is not a host. So we further starve them. And then the following year, we can plant our cash crop. Then after we've done our cash crop, we should be able to, it should be clean enough that we get a cash crop. But what's going to happen now is the nematodes will start to build up again. You're never going to get rid of them precisely. So after we finish that cash crop, that's when we harvest it. We plant straight away, we plant the cash crop again as a trap crop. Just for a few weeks. So if it's potatoes or whatever, and what you do is you monitor it. You know how to pull up sample plants and see that the nematodes have gone into the roots. That's when you plow it up again. In other words, break the cycle, let it rot down, plant a cover crop, and so on. So by doing that, what we're doing is continuously breaking the life cycle instead of in two ways. One, we're getting them to falsely reproduce or grow in our cash crop. We're destroying them, but you never catch all of them. You won't catch them all with poison, but but then the cover crop, which is a non-host species, you starve them and so on. So you're just reducing them down year after year and cleaning the soil. You can do that with most root diseases. Root pests and diseases are the most difficult to control. Very little success with chemicals. But this system, the combination of a trap crop and a non-host cover crop, you'll break it down. The other one is also building soil health, because what happens when you get a healthy soil, we've got the bulk of the nematodes we have in the soil aren't root-eating nematodes. They're actually really important nematodes for recycling organic matter. That's one of the problems with using nematicides. We kill the beneficial nematodes. And we also kill the nematodes that eat nematodes. So if we build up soil health, we actually want all the beneficial nematodes. So and it's the same with, if you've got different root borers, beetles, all these things that attack root crops use the same principles, and you'll be able to do it very successfully and better than using the poisons.
Okay, and last question, do you ever use sticky traps?
Yeah. Look, I think sticky traps are great. Really simple. There's so many of them, and you can make your own up very easily. And different ways of doing it. I quite often use sugar and borax. Are a really good sticky trap, but also the insects eat that, and it kills them. And in the tropics, we have massive boron deficiencies because of the heavy rain. So it's a really good one to use, because the side effect is that we correct our boron deficiency instead of poisoning the soil. It's actually beneficial.
Okay, that's all the questions that I see. And I know Pro-Organic and Regeneration Beliefs want to thank you so much for taking your time so early in the morning and answering all of our questions and the presentation and everything, and just sharing your expertise with all of us. We will post this on our Facebook page. It'll probably take maybe at least a week or so before it gets there, but we will post the entire presentation there. And just so everybody is aware, our next general meeting will be this next Saturday from 3 to 5 via Zoom. Everyone's welcome to attend. And our next speakers meeting will be on June the 5th, and it'll be the Maya Forest Gardeners panel discussion with Dr. Annabelle Ford and all. So please get in touch with either or both organizations if you want more information. And again, Andre, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Look, what I was going to say is I'm very happy to convert my presentation to a PDF and send it to you. So if anybody wants it, you're most welcome.
Oh, that would be great. Yes. Because that's also something that Karen can post on the Pro Organic website, so people can go and see it at any time.
Right.
And the PDF version, that would be awesome.
And the other thing I just want to say is I hope next year things are back to normal, and you can invite me back to Bailey's.
Yes. Yes, definitely. We all do too. Yes. Okay. Any other comments or questions or anything for Andre? Well, we thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. And I look forward to seeing you next year.
Yes, likewise.
Okay, ciao.
Ciao.